Thank you, everyone. As said before, we're based in Hong Kong and headquartered. Outblaze started in a small place in Wan Chai, in Borough Street. It was sort of the equivalent of a garage outfit. And today we're basically a reasonably sized group with 12 different sub-companies. Many of them you might not know because actually our market is in Hong Kong. But the two companies of the brands you might know is we have a joint venture with Sanrio called Sanrio Digital. So if you know Hello Kitty, anything online or animations that you see on Hello Kitty, that's us. Or we have a joint venture also with Turner called Turnout Ventures, as in Turner plus Outblaze. And that does all the digital stuff for, if you have kids, then you'll know Ben 10, Powerpuff Girls, and that kind of stuff. So anyway, we are mostly a research and development and design house. So maybe I'll just quickly introduce it very briefly. A global operation, we founded in 1998. In Hong Kong alone, we employ approximately 200 people in the cyberport. We consider ourselves a pioneer in the internet space. We started this business in 98. Actually, when I came to Hong Kong, I started one of Hong Kong's first ISP called Hong Kong Online, which kind of tells you the fact that I could register that name, the state of the market. It was a terrible failure, but that's how you learn. And then I started Outblaze, which worked out a little better. And but the U.S. is our largest market. In fact, Hong Kong locally represents only less than 1%, but I'll come to that later. Some of the recent milestones to the question of the cloud computing lab. We sold the email business, which was the core of our original business, which actually was our cloud computing lab, which you may not know what it is, but basically if you are using Apple, if you're using iTunes, if you're using Amazon, everything sits on the cloud, everything's virtualized, you're just using the service. And in fact, IBM bought that business of ours and actually set up their research lab in Hong Kong through that acquisition, and it became IBM's first Hong Kong lab, and actually I think Hong Kong's first cloud computing lab, and that was a few years ago. Today, one of our main businesses I'm focusing my time is we're the largest app developer publisher in Asia. We have 45 million customers. In fact, if you have an Android phone, you'll see under our brands, we have like 5 or 6 apps in the top. The number 1 trending app is ours. Or if you have an Apple iPhone and you look at the top 25 apps, you'll find several apps of ours in the top ranking charts. So and a bunch of awards. So I'll just skip that part. And so did you see the office? I mean, we don't really have a process. You see lots of computers and lots of kids working on it. So our workforce is generally quite young. And I'll come to that part later. And we have offices in multi-different countries. So, all right. I guess the main thing for us is we focus in 4 key areas. We're a consumer business, really, at the end of the day, whether it's B2B or B2B2C or just B2C directly. So we develop products, and it goes directly to the consumer experience. Research and development is our core. More than half of our budget, annual budget, goes into R&D, which basically includes programming, development, and innovative design. We pay a lot of attention to IP technology, so things like augmented reality. And we also use brands. That's why we have our joint ventures, which is, say, Sanrio or Turner, to basically help promote the products as well. We aim to have a fun and creative consumer experience, and of course, hope to make some money on the way too. And this is a range of some of our products. Some of the brands you might recognize. And again, if you have kids, there's a high likelihood that you will have, your kids will have played one of our games at some point, or seen one of our animations and so forth. And it's Tom and Jerry, Hello Kitty, Ben 10. So. Okay, so enough about our business. Let's talk about Hong Kong, why we picked Hong Kong, and what I thought were some of the key advantages. So first, I think Hong Kong is a nice low-friction environment. And by low-friction, I don't mean that it's easy to do business, not at all. But it is a quick, no-nonsense environment. So if you want to set up a business, you can do it very quickly. The tax environment is actually very beneficial, I think, as all of you know. And it has a very excellent support framework, whether it's legal, accounting, or so on. And that should not be underestimated, particularly in our kind of work, which relates to intellectual property and so forth. That is an important element. And also the ability to be able to do intellectual property related work globally. In other words, meaning since our core market is actually the US, and actually our second largest market is the EU, we need to be able to support that out of Hong Kong, and we can do that. And it's a pragmatic business environment, meaning you know, people want to make money, so it's pretty easy, right? It's not that difficult. It's not terribly political on the business side of things, so we can move things fairly quickly here. And of course, from a geography, we can go everywhere very, very, very easily. The other thing is the people. So this is a fairly important part for us because our business is nothing without the people, because our people make the content, create the programs. You know, we don't have production plans, we don't have manufacturing, so you know, you could say our IP sits with the people. And the diversity is key in our case because it's a global marketplace. And frankly, we think diversity is key to any success. And Hong Kong is attractive to both people in and outside of Hong Kong. People in Hong Kong don't really want to leave Hong Kong most of the time. They like it here. And people who from abroad come to Hong Kong, like myself, and say, hey, I think I'll be here for a couple of months, and then, you know, 20 years later you go, what happened? And I think a lot of stories in Hong Kong are about sort of people who came here short term and ended up being here long term because it has an attractive lifestyle, whether be it food or be it whatever. And, you know, as mentioned before, pollution is an issue, but still, despite all of that, it still seems to be a magnet for talent and has an educated local workforce. In fact, it's easier to bring someone to Hong Kong from overseas. So Hong Kong may not have all the talent required. Frankly, even though it's got 7 million people, as compared to the world, it's still very small. But we can easily ask people from the US or from Canada or from UK or from anywhere else in the world to come move to Hong Kong for a couple of years, and that's not a problem. Ask them to do that, let's say in China, it's a little harder because English, language skills, lifestyle, food, Lan Kwai Fong, whichever it is, right? People just basically have a certain preference. So Hong Kong does offer these choices, and it's perhaps less sterile than, say, the Singapore version. The other thing that's important for us, especially because of our global business, is cross-cultural awareness. Hong Kong is unique in that sense because it was a former colony, of course, so it has a westernized history, yet it is very traditional in that sense too, in the sense that it has, it's rooted in very Asian and Chinese values. And that creates an interesting blend for understanding. So you've probably heard some horror stories, or if you work in some organizations. Certainly when I first came to Hong Kong, one of the companies I worked with was AT&T, which is of course a big global company, but very Americanized, which is both good and bad. But you'd ask an American business manager who at that point probably has never been to Asia, come out and run a team in Asia with an American style, and doesn't always work out very well. And it's not because they don't know what they do, it's because of the cultural awareness. It's because they maybe rub people the wrong way. It's maybe because they don't understand face, or they don't understand how to communicate. And that is important, especially in a globalized world. And so that is an advantage for Hong Kong as well, because whether it's people from overseas who have lived in Hong Kong for a long time, or whether it is basically people educated locally who interact with a lot of people from abroad, there is, again, that kind of globalized cultural awareness that becomes a managerial advantage. So out of Hong Kong, we can have managers that know how to deal with people in our Philippine office, know how to deal with people in Korea, know how to deal with people in China or the US or the UK or generally most places around the world. We don't do anything in Africa, but perhaps even there. So it's just it's an easier mix for us. And I forgot to mention this, but maybe back to this slide here is also in Hong Kong, as mentioned before, is a great test bed. We have 500,000 customers here in Hong Kong, 2 million downloads on our apps. And the thing about Hong Kong consumers, they love to buy phones, they love to buy many phones, they love to download lots of apps, and they love to play them very often. They don't pay as much as, let's say, counterparts in Japan or the US. In fact, they're quite, let's say, frugal that way, to be polite about it. But the consequence of that is if you can make the product work well in Hong Kong, then generally speaking, there is a fairly good chance that you can succeed elsewhere. Because it is, the thing about low friction is to say that it's easy to set up, but the high friction part is that it's incredibly competitive. And because of our business in particular, and because of the English-speaking nature, our competition is not just Hong Kong companies, but is actually global companies who are also selling products into Hong Kong in that space. And that actually means that if you succeed here, then you can succeed, generally speaking, around the world, at least in our space. Okay, so people is a critical asset. So, there's a bunch of ingredients, but I think the main thing for us is people, hiring, and retaining. In fact, retention is perhaps more important to us as a gradient than, say, hiring. Because, so we have a less than 5% turnover rate, which we're trying to continue. That's pretty high for us already, because we invest in the people. So if they leave, frankly, everything goes. And so we have to do a lot to retain them. Continued retraining is important. I think the general feeling and that's kind of an issue of sort of university does not really prepare, I think this is universal, right, to prepare you necessarily for real work. In fact, it's just kind of you're graduating to enter the next stage in life as opposed to think you're finished. Because over half of our budget is in research and development, everything is involved in training and development. And the other advantage we do have in Hong Kong, maybe it's a bit more unique to us, is that we are kind of unique in the sense that there's not many Hong Kong companies like us here. So while we have products which we compete with globally, we do have a niche that appeals to a certain audience. If you want to make games and you want to have a global sort of million user base to try out your games, there's not many choices for you to go to in Hong Kong. There are, of course, other companies you can go to, but it's not as big. And that does provide an advantage because we provide a unique proposition. And the point is not so much that you have to do a business that nobody else does, but rather that there might be a proposition for us anyway to retain talent that is attractive and that nobody else does. So people want to go here. So you can go choose to work for, our biggest competition for engineering talent actually comes from investment banks because they pay very well most of the time, maybe not recently, and some people prefer working for a bank, but it's that talent that goes there. So we provide those that want to join an organization like us because they're passionate about games, or passionate about content, or passionate about doing stuff for kids. And that choice is good for us because that helps us in the retention. And perhaps that could be another way in which one could try to retain key people. And in conclusion, a few things that we think Hong Kong could do even better. I think Hong Kong's lifestyle is great, but it is still an attractive short-term place for most people. When people come to Hong Kong, especially from overseas, they don't think of Hong Kong as a base. Some do stay very long, like myself and many of us here. But I think the long-term part is important because quite a few people, at least in our workforce, come here, let's say from Canada or from US, but they're all thinking in 2 or 3 years they want to go, right? Which is, but if there's things that can be done to make it more long-term, then I think there's more opportunities for innovation because that's an investment, right? Education is important. Education in Hong Kong is very good already. Many of the students also study abroad and come back. But I think one thing that is a little different is young entrepreneurship. I think it's already been said. I mean, most SMEs are very important to Hong Kong. But I think the difference, and I remember this specifically, I think 13 years ago when we first started in Outblaze, when we were trying to hire fresh grads, I remember this quote where one of the, actually several of them said, I'd like to work here, but I got to ask my parents. And of course, we were in a crappy one-chai office, and it really didn't look like we had much of a chance at the time as compared to, let's say, a job at HSBC. But the point that I was trying to make then is like, that's fine. You can always join HSBC later. The amount of money that you end up making in HSBC for your first job is insignificant as compared to what you would be making when you're 30 or 35. And the kind of risks or the kind of experience you would get as a young entrepreneur or starting for a startup, where frankly your experience is much broader, should be greater. And I think that's kind of a contrast I see of Hong Kong versus, everyone's trying to emulate Silicon Valley, but in our space anyway. But the difference about Silicon Valley is that everyone thinks it's cool to be in a startup or to do a startup right from college, whereas in Hong Kong, frankly, a lot of people end up working for a corporation. And by the time you hit 30, and you have a child, and you have a mortgage, and you have a down payment, or you have those responsibilities, your ability to take risk is slightly different. So I think if Hong Kong has, let's say, more encouragement in joining smaller companies where you have a more diverse role, I think it would definitely provide maybe an even bigger innovation spark in Hong Kong. And I think the other one is more development in individuals as a rule or as a philosophy. There's some, Hong Kong does great jobs in promotional budgets, sending people abroad, but I actually think also if there's some training and personal development grants that are substantial, as opposed to equipment or development loans in that sense, it would help because people investing, especially for service economy, is, at least in our view, very important. So I think those are some of the things that can help create corporate diversity and make Hong Kong an even better place than it already is. Right. Thank you.